Now, amid all of the discussion of this is a bipartisan process, oh, yes, it is, oh, no, it isn't, it sounds now as though the sticking point here pertains to an exchange for derivatives. Will you explain why that has become a sticking point, how you think these bills will appropriately address it, and whether there can be agreement here?
On the political matter, I don't know. I am stunned that it has become a sticking point. As you know, the basic issue is that we've got trillions of dollars in over-the-counter derivatives that don't trade on exchanges, that we know nothing about, that are basically unregulated. And they almost brought down the entire financial system when the credit default swaps threatened to blow up AIG. And so the president, early on, and everyone else that's informed in this area says we must bring transparency and oversight to those derivatives. Now, I thought everyone would be in agreement on that, but of course, except for, of course, the big banks. And the big banks have funded a massive lobbying effort through the Republican Party, and I guess it has now become a major sticking point. But I ultimately don't think it's going to be the deciding factor.
Are these derivatives, I mean, is part of the argument that these derivatives are private contracts between counterparties as opposed to securities that ought to be regulated that way?
That's basically what they're saying, and that would be fine if it weren't for the fact that we just went through a crisis in which these quote-unquote private contracts threatened to blow up every financial institution in the country, and the government had to step in with a big bailout. Now, I don't think this will end up being the sticking point, because I want to see the Republican Party stand up and have all of their members say, yes, we're for putting loopholes into the derivatives law so that they aren't regulated and remain totally non-transparent. So I don't think they're going to do it.
Will this thing end up passing with just Democrat-only votes, or will you have a bipartisan final result?
I think it will be bipartisan, because I think outside of the Republican leadership, who from the statements they were making, I don't think they've read the bill. I think they got handed a set of talking points from a GOP consultant that they're just reading, because it's not even what's in the bill. And this issue on derivatives, I have to think that just a regular member, no matter what party they are, if they just ask themselves, do I want derivatives to remain completely in the dark so we don't know what's happening, unregulated, so that a very small number of big financial institutions can make a lot of money? I don't think they're going to.
But it's going to be extremely hard to make up transparent exchanges for all these kinds of derivatives. There are so many different kinds. What about a hands-off approach that just says for every trade you have to have at least 20% capital in your bank on hand? What if you just did a capital requirement without requiring automatic transparency for everything?
Let me say the president's totally in favor of your view of we need to have higher capital requirements, and especially for things that are more risky. But on top of that, that's not enough, because what we saw here is the counterparty risks associated with these markets blowing up. If you know nothing about them, they have engaged in all kinds of accounting gimmicks that when push comes to shove, they say, oops, sorry, we don't have enough money, and we're threatening to blow up the whole world.
Austin, I am just shocked. I am just shocked that the banking industry has done this. We had the head of SIFMA on, who is their lobbying agency, and I asked him very specifically if they were fighting getting transparency into this, and he said absolutely not. So
I know
it's amazing to me.
Here we are.
Let me ask you this: we've got two guys coming on who sit on opposite sides of the aisle. We got Glenn Hubbard coming on along with Roger Altman, and both of them say that because of the commitments that we have made to future generations, taxes must go up. We just have to fund it through higher taxes. Is this White House supportive of a value-added tax?
No, the White House hasn't put forward anything like that. I think it's important that we leave to they have appointed this fiscal commission, which is going to address the issues of long-run deficit reduction. The fiscal situation facing the country is a tough spot, has been. We have known about that for many, many years. And we've tried to address through cost controls in health care. We're going to get results from this fiscal commission on a bipartisan basis of what they're going to do.
Mr. Goolsbee, forgive me for interrupting. We had a guest on a few moments ago, and I know this may take you out of your area of expertise, but probably not. We had a guest on talking about the editorial in the Wall Street Journal today about a new executive order that fundamentally for federal construction projects requires that those contracts go to union contractors who represent only 15% of the available contracting force out there. What is your response to the idea that that is improper and costs taxpayers billions?
Well, my only response, I haven't, that is outside my lane. I don't know the details on it. I don't think that's an accurate description. The president has been firmly committed to fairness in our contracting practices and making sure that we're paying reasonable wages. He has always been a major advocate of the middle class. You've seen in the Recovery Act, and as he's been emphasizing the last few weeks, that's why he favored and got passed tax cuts for 95% of workers in the country. To suggest that the president somehow only cares about 15% or whatever percent of workers that you mentioned is totally off base.
But fundamentally, it seems to me that it's okay for the taxpayer to pay more money for higher labor costs than they otherwise would have. That's the assumption that comes from this executive order.
As I say, I don't know the details of that executive order. I think that's a mischaracterization of what the president's position has been. And when we start looking at the taxpayer funding, I think we shouldn't get out of the realm of financial regulation, because one of the sticking points besides derivatives is going to be who is going to foot the bill for the costs of the bailout that was started under the Bush administration, the TARP law. And the president has said that ought to be a financial responsibility fee borne by the big banks. That they should clean up their own mess.
Those guys that have already paid all of it back, right? Gotcha.
They've paid some of it back, but they did not pay back for the guarantees that they got. And as you know, they made several $billions of profit by getting guarantees from the FDIC and the U.S. government.
Right,
and they didn't pay that back.
Thank